Hope you're ready to actually do some stuff with JavaScript. These videos are going to be about functions, and they're not going to be exhaustive because there's so much more we need to learn in order to actually take advantage of them. But we're going to get a good primer on what functions are, the core concepts, and an overview of the different types of functions that you can write. The rest of the entire course is going to be using functions since they are, like types, a fundamental building block of JavaScript. And that's how we're going to sort of get good with them, is we're going to be writing functions for the rest of this entire course. So what are they? Well, functions allow us to group together sets of statements. Remember, let's take a look at some of our code here. What's a statement? Well, this is a statement right here where we maybe set a variable. This is a statement here where we set a variable and do like a condition. This is a statement right here where we actually go off and run console.log so we can see the data. So all of this stuff, if you want to ever group it together, generally they're related to each other, and then generally they produce some sort of output. So we want to group those instructions together inside of a function. Now, functions can take in data, and those are known as arguments. We're going to talk about the difference between arguments and parameters in just a second, but know that when you pass in data into a function, it's called an argument. And then they perform some work, and that is what is referred to as a statement. And then sometimes they also return a value. Okay, that was a lot there. So let's take a look at math.max. This is a good one. So math.max is a function. It's actually something called a method. We'll talk about the difference between a function and a method. It's not much in a bit, but math.max is the function. Now, if you run it, it gives you negative infinity. I'm not really sure why, because we didn't pass it any data, but we actually need to pass it some data. And what math.max will do is it will return us the maximum value. So if we pass it two numbers, 10 and 12, it's going to return to us the highest number, which is 12, right? Makes sense. So what's going on here, right? So this line right here, that is a JavaScript statement. This pieces of data that you pass into the function. So if you want to give a function multiple pieces of data, you simply just put a comma between each of them, and sort of a best practice to put a space in between each of these. These things are called arguments. So the data that you pass to a function, the data that you give to a function in order for it to run, is called an argument. And then sometimes functions will return to you some data that is generally like the answer or the computed output based on what you pass in. In this case, it's going to return us 12. So similarly, we can say like math.floor. If we pass it 2.444, it will return to us 2. It gives us the floor of that actual value. So in this case, we just pass one argument of 2.444, and it returns to us 2. So there is a whole bunch of built-in functions in JavaScript. So like the browser and Node and whatever JavaScript runtime you're using, they come with all of these built-in things. And we've already been sort of sneakily using them because like there's no way around it. And probably the one that we've used most so far is console.log. And what console.log will do is you just say, hey, and what that will do is it actually just logs it into the thing. You'll notice that this thing returned to us undefined. And you know that it's returned because in the console, the statement is what you write on the arrow pointing in, and then the arrow pointing back with a dot is what gets returned to you after you run that function. So our statement, math.max 10 and 12, return to us 12. Statement, math.floor, returns to us 2. Console.log, hey, it logs hey, but then it returns to us undefined. Like, why is that? Well, not all functions are meant to actually return to you values. Sometimes functions just go off and do a bunch of work. In this case, this function does one thing. It logs hey to the console, and then it's over. It doesn't have anything to give back to us. It doesn't say like, hey, I'm back. I brought you like this t-shirt or something like that. It didn't bring us back anything. So in that case, it returns to us undefined. And that's totally fine because not all functions return to us value. So let's look at some of the other ones that we got here. We've got parse float that will take in, if we take 20.3, it will return to us. Oh, sorry. No, if you pass it a string, it will return to us a number. So this is all about types. You take in strings and it returns to us a number. Parse int does something similarly. We looked at that earlier. It will take in a string and return a integer, which is a whole number. Again, they both return numbers, but it's just telling us whether we should keep the decimal or not. We looked at math.round, math.ceil, math.floor. There's a whole bunch of date functions which we're going to go into, but if you take a look at capital D date.now, that is a function that takes no arguments. So you don't need to pass anything to it because it doesn't need anything. And what it actually returns to us is the number of milliseconds since God created the earth, I always say, but it's the number of milliseconds since like January 1, 1970, something like that. So you see, if I run it over and over, it's always changing. Actually, if you go to epoch.now.sh, there's this little tool that I use. And what it does is if you take like, let's see, I ran this one right here, paste it in, and it says it's June 11th, 2019 at 11:48 a.m. You can also do the opposite. So if I were to go and pick some sort of date in the future and also select a time, press OK, it will give us the number of milliseconds. Some other programming languages use seconds, but JavaScript goes down to the millisecond, which is exactly what we want right here. So that is dates. We're going to go much more into dates and actually working with them, but that's just an example of one of the built-in functions that we have. We also have functions that will sort of work with the what's called the DOM, work with the HTML elements that are on the page. So let's actually go ahead and make a new file called functions.html, and we'll use our HTML base, and we'll just call it functions. And then here I'll give a script tag. And above that script tag, let's give ourselves a paragraph tag that says, hey, how ya doing? Open that up in your browser. Now, if we were to do this, const p is equal to document.query selector, quote, p, and then console log p. After that, what we're doing here is we're running a function called document.querySelector. We pass it what's called a selector. Again, we have an entire section of this course on this. I know that I keep saying that, but this is sort of just a primer. And then what it does is it will find something that matches this selector, much like CSS does, and puts it into a variable. And then I go ahead and log that variable. Now we see that there's a paragraph there. There's all kinds of other functions that are in it. There's some cool mobile ones. There's like navigator.vibrate. Yeah, navigator.vibrate. And navigator failed to execute vibrate on navigator. 1 argument required, but only 0 present. So here's another good example is if you don't know what arguments that a function should take, we like to use the Mozilla Developer Network docs in order to see what's going on. So let's do it. Navigator vibrate. And usually you'll look for the Mozilla developer. If you want, you can also just put MDN in the search. And what that will do is it will make sure that the Mozilla docs sort of float to the top. Which is good. The Google Chrome stuff is also good, but let's take a look here. And this is generally what you find for a function. It says it's a method. It is. We'll go into what that is in just a second. If such hardware exists, if the device doesn't support vibration, this method has no effect. If a vibration pattern is already in progress, blah, blah, blah. So it kind of talks about what it does. And then it usually will also tell you what it returns. So if the method is unable to vibrate because of invalid parameters, it will return false. Did that happen? Navigator. No, it didn't return false. It just returned an error. It didn't return anything. It just errored out. And that's probably because we didn't pass it anything. Good. And then the syntax is going to tell us what it is that we need to pass it. So it's telling us that we need to run navigator.vibrate. We'll talk about what this window dot is in a future video. And then pass it a pattern. That's the 1 argument. Now, what is a pattern? Well, we'll go down here. Provides a pattern of vibration and pause intervals. Each value indicates a number of milliseconds. Ooh, that's kind of cool. So you can give it a 200 milliseconds, or you can pass it what this is called an array. We'll go into what those are, but essentially it's just a list of multiple values. So if I go here, pass it 200, it should return false because I'm on my computer and it won't work, but ooh, it returned true. What, did my laptop vibrate? No. Weird. Well, it said it should return false if it's enabled to vibrate, but maybe it just sort of like gives it to the OS and it says, all right, I passed it off to the OS, and the OS should vibrate the device if it's on there. So again, obviously it's not going to work on a computer that doesn't have it, but I'm sure if you pulled that up on an Android phone, not sure if it's supported on iOS, but there's just a whole world of possible functions that are out there that we can use to work. And really that's how we're going to start to build up our own library of functions, and we're going to build up custom functionality. Soon we'll make our own functions, which are composed of other functions, and they sort of group together a bunch. So maybe we want to figure out a bunch of math, select an element on the page, and then vibrate the phone. You can put that all into a single function. Let's look at a couple more here. Let's clear it out. If you have a bunch of text on the page, so let's go ahead and do that. Paragraph, type lorem 500, hit tab. So I'm using the Emmet extension there. That should give us a bunch of text on the page. I'm going to do that over again. Paragraph, lorem 200, good. Paragraph, lorem 1000, good. So there we go, lots of things, and we should be able to just type scroll to, and we want to scroll to 200. Failed to execute scroll to window parameter 1 options is not an object. Okay, so again, I don't know how to use it, so we'll do mdn scroll to. There we go. Look for it. Oh, that's not the one we want. This one is window.scroll to. We'll talk about element methods and window methods in the future, but it tells us that you need to pass it an X coordinate and a Y coordinate. So maybe we didn't pass the Y coordinate. Let's try. We don't want to scroll 0. Oh, I think it's the other way around. How does X and Y? I was terrible at Battleship. Ooh, there we go. So what that did is it just jumped the window. Well, maybe I'll jump it down to 500. And it will jump it down. I believe that there are some options. Yeah, it says here, parameters. You can either pass an X and a Y, or you can pass an options object. So we'll go down here. Options is a scroll to options dictionary. That's kind of a word that we use in JavaScript to represent an object. So that's not a special thing in JavaScript. That's just an object that has a number of set properties on it. So if we look here, you'll see that we're passing an object. So this is a great example of how you can pass any type to a function. So in this case, we're passing 2 numbers, but it's also an option to pass one object, a type of object. And inside of that object, it gives you a top, a left, and a behavior. Let's take a look at that. So clear it out. I'm going to say scroll to some curly brackets, top, 500, left, 0. What was the behavior? Smooth. So that is a string. Woo, I like it. 500, 600, scrolls down, top, 0, scrolls back to the top. So you see that that's how one of these function returns nothing to us, undefined, but it just goes off and does some work to us. If you want to know what all the options are for that, I think we can click on this one, scroll to options, and I think let's take a look for behavior. There we go, scroll to options.behavior, smooth, or auto. Auto is the default. Smooth is the only other option. There's no other like fun ones that we could put in there. So that is our default functions. Those are functions that are built in. I'm obviously not going to go through all of them because there's probably thousands of them in the browser, and we're just going to learn them as we start to actually build real stuff in the browser and build some fun examples. In the next video, we're going to do is look at how we can create our own functions from scratch.